Marine predators are too cunning to stay hungry. Dolphins toss fish out of the water to stun it. Whales create bubble traps, and orcas have perfected their hunting skills. Prey simply couldn't win against such odds until evolution took its side. How to avoid falling prey to a shark? You can find plenty of recommendations on the internet about this, but the most obvious way is, well, get out of the water. Things get a little more complicated when you're a fish. You don't want to get out on land just yet, and have no desire to become a dinner of the sea predator either. You have to get creative. And so, the flying fish learned to fly. Turned out, rising above the water surface was enough to outrun mackerel, tuna, swordfish, marlin, and other large hunters who would not mind eating you. A perfect defense mechanism for someone who's not grown thorns or poisonous skin, or can't pretend to be a stone. Though, how useful is this escape strategy in general? It's cool when you fly over the abyss and your enemies stay on the other side, or if you're at least separated by a wall, but a flying fish still lands in the water. And in the seas, there are usually no barriers of any kind, at least at great depths. Wouldn't it be easier to sail away really quick? It may seem weird, but the speed of a flying fish in the water is lower than in the air. That is, it literally flies faster than it swims. Nature, are you okay? No wonder predators do not expect this turn of events. About 43 miles per hour by air, about 37 underwater. We're talking about a common fish with a tail, gills, and fins. When escaping, a flying fish can rise up to 4 feet high above the water. After that, it moves forward in a very peculiar way, covering up to 1,312 feet. Then the flight, or rather gliding, is over, but only for the fish to dive, accelerate, and take off again. The cycle can repeat up to 12 times, and each time the speed is really great. Well, many electric scooters move slower than that. Of course, simply jumping out of the water would not be enough for such a long flight. Try to repeat that. You won't even cover 3 feet. All because people, unlike flying fish, simply do not know how to properly use water and air for their purposes without additional tools. Airplanes, ships, and surfboards are cool, but we are too heavy to catch the currents of air and use them to prolong our flight. And let's be honest, the human body does not have a very good shape in terms of aerodynamics.
My back! Oh, my back!
The flying fish was lucky. Life in the water had already made it streamlined. There were only a few details left to add, like special fins and tail. As it rises, the flying fish begins to steer, quickly flapping its tail while still underwater. Then it overcomes the water resistance and takes off, spreading its extended fins, which help the fish float above the water surface. When a flying fish approaches the surface again, it can flap its tail and steer without completely submerging back into the water. This all happened so quickly that biologists could not determine the way the fish moved for decades. Was it flapping its fins like a bird, or did it use some other technique? High-resolution photos of flying fish appeared only in 1941. So people have known about the existence of flying fish since antiquity. You see how many years it took for humanity to figure everything out. Mediterranean sailors of the past used to thank flying fish, return to shore at night to sleep. That is, first, they finish their shift as well fish, and then they rest on land. Well, yeah, I can easily imagine that. Though actually, what I really want to know is what happens to the gills of a flying fish when it travels long distances through the air. They probably get dry during the flight, and for any other fish, this means certain death. Well, flying fish know how the gills work. They also know very well that evolution has not given them any lungs. So it's better not to even try breathing while you're in the air. Yes, flying fish simply hold their breath, closing their gill covers not to get too dry. If you think about it, there's nothing strange about this. People have learned to hold their breath when they dive, so why shouldn't the fish do the same? Fortunately, they don't need something like swimming goggles. The eyes of the flying fish have evolved to see both underwater and in the air without squinting. Okay, let's say we figured out what helps the flying fish fly. But how could a fish learn to fly anyway? I mean, it's a fish. Apparently, this is a really good way to stay safe from predators, because this is not the first time fish came up with it. The earliest known fish capable of flight belonged to the Thoracopterus and lived from 235 to 242 million years ago. But it did not evolve into a more modern form. These fish are not related in any way. The ancient one died out along with the rest of the prehistoric animals, and then about 65 million years ago, new flying fish began to appear. If they knew evolution had done this way before they appeared, they would probably be upset. Well, who wants to do something a second time? When you can just copy someone else's work. But in nature, it happens all the time. Most of the creatures that can or could fly evolved independently from each other. Insects, bats, birds, and pterosaurs evolved on their own without sharing a common ancestor. And since all this happened with different species at different times independently, does this mean anyone can learn to fly? In theory, yes. Of course, this will take a very long time. But if flight becomes a cool and irreplaceable feature for an animal from the evolutionary perspective, it'll grow wings. There are various theories on how the wings appeared. According to one of them, the first feathered dinosaurs waved their front legs while running, which allowed them to accelerate even more, and in the end, they just got too carried away. According to another theory, the animals learned to fly with the help of trees. Ancient pterosaurs jumped from one branch to another, and over time their bodies were transformed in order to cover ever more distance. By the way, flying squirrels evolved the same way. They appeared 18 to 20 million years ago and began to fly to get to food faster. Imagine climbing down from one tree, then running to another one, then climbing to the branch. Someone will have enough time to steal your nuts. It's much easier to fly from tree to tree. Otherwise, no food will replenish the energy you spent while running back and forth. Imagine if Batman moved everywhere on foot. He'd be damn exhausted too. But flying from tree to tree and flying after jumping out of the water are completely different matters. And not only because we talk of different animals, these flights also have completely different goals. Flying squirrels usually fly to get food, which means they replenish energy. Flying fish rise into the air, trying to escape from the predator. That is, they only spend energy. In addition, they have to overcome the resistance of the water every time. Not the easiest thing to do, especially if you're a small fish. At the same time, it's believed that flying over water is easier. The closer the flight is to the surface, the stronger the so-called ground effect. Large birds, for example, pelicans, feel it especially well. The effect comes in action when the bird is within its full wings span away from the surface of the water. The air seems to funnel between the lower surfaces of the wings and water. It's thereby compressed and acts like a dense cushion that supports the bird aloft. A sort of a bonus to conventional aerodynamic forces. Well, I never found accurate information where it's easier to fly over water or land because the ground effect works in both cases. The scientists, as always, are not certain of anything. But here's a fact for you. During World War II, long-range bombers often flew close to the surface of the water to save fuel. They knew how to use the ground effect to their advantage. But back to the flying fish. To avoid underwater predators, they started flying over the surface. However, this turned out to be not the safest place. Frigged birds love eating flying fish, especially since they don't even have to dive after it. The prey literally jumps right into their beaks. Favorite food delivered straight to you. And it seems like some of the frigged birds are so lazy, they no longer even look for fish themselves, but simply steal it from the fishermen. We'll see you later.